Sikhi began in the late 1400s in Punjab. Punjab is now divided between the nation states of India and Pakistan. Founded by Guru Nanak, a revolutionary who was looking around at the world around him and seeing oppression based on gender, seeing oppression based on caste, seeing oppression based on religion, and in many ways, oppression, hierarchy, division, justified by religion, right? The caste system is this ancient idea rooted in the Vedas that justifies hierarchy and oppression because God said so, right? It's because of deeds of your past life, right? Really convenient way to justify domination and suffering, and this made no sense to Guru Nanak, right? So the central premise of Guru Nanak's and of Sikhs is ek onkar, which is this idea of oneness. Sometimes oversimplified as one God, but really we're talking about a oneness that connects all living beings. And so why that oneness is so important is that it's not just an idea. It's actually a call to action, right? If that divine light is in you, if that divine light is in you, if that divine light is in you, then it is my responsibility, it is my duty as a Sikh to ensure that you don't experience suffering, right? That you have enough to eat, that you don't experience exploitation, right? That you don't experience violence. That is what it means to be a Sikh. That is why we exist, right? So that's why we call it the Sikh revolution, because it wasn't just like a new spiritual idea. And these spiritual ideas had existed, right? There's writings of Sufi poets and saints in our body of sacred poetry. There's writings of radical Bhakti poets and saints. So these ideas of oneness and really revolutionary love, in Valerie's words, have been around before Sikhs ever came to be. But it was a new movement to say, this isn't just an idea. We have to act, right? We have to act. And because of these radical ideas, because these were radical ideas, and sadly they are still radical ideas, Sikhs were not so popular, were not so liked by those in power, right? So at many points in our history, there was the price on the head of a Sikh, right? There was campaigns to erase us. There were genocidal campaigns against us. This is an artistic depiction of our fifth Guru, Guru Arjan, being tortured and eventually martyred by Jahangir, one of the Mughal emperors, by his regime, right? Because of these radical ideas, because they saw him and the Sikh movement as a threat to their power, right? As a threat to their domination. And so this turning point of Sikhs becoming the enemy of the state, if you will, enemy of the empire, led to us becoming Sant Sipahi. It's this idea that the spiritual and the political are intimately interlinked, right? This idea that to worship means to fight for justice and liberation, right? That is a form of prayer, is to fight to ensure you don't face suffering, that you don't experience violence, that you have enough to eat, right? That is how we pray, right? So that became a part of our tradition, including taking up arms against the empire, right? So the thinking in Sikhi, what the Sant Sipahi meant at that time was we fight for liberation and justice for all by any means necessary. And if all other methods have failed, then only then we take up the sword. That was sort of the line of thinking. So there's a long history of armed struggle for justice and liberation in our community. But the campaigns of targeting us didn't stop. You know, Guru Arjan's time is in the 1500s. It didn't stop then. It continued. And actually, as recently as the 1980s, there was a campaign, basically a genocidal campaign against Sikhs in India. Because of all the oppression that Sikhs have experienced in India, there are some Sikhs who believe that we will never have true justice in that nation state. So there are some that are fighting for a Sikh nation state. There are some that are just fighting against oppression and looking for a secular country that respects all religions, right? And as a result of this insurgency, as a result of this movement for self-determination in the Sikh community, the Indian government, under the leadership of Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, invaded our most holy of places, Darbar Sahib, or the Golden Temple, in 1984. Many were killed that day, all in the name of counterterrorism, right? Sounds familiar. And as a result, her 2 Sikh bodyguards assassinated her, and then all hell broke loose. There were sort of what the government liked to call riots, communal violence, all over Delhi and Punjab, but what we actually know as were pogroms, right? And very much government-sponsored, government-planned, police-planned massacres of Sikh families, of Sikh men, torturings, burnings, lynchings, and somewhere in the realm of 10 to 20,000 Sikhs were killed in that moment. A lot of Sikhs fled to this country and other parts of the diaspora in the 1980s as well. And we're still dealing with the repercussions. No one has ever been held accountable for those crimes, those government-sponsored crimes. So complete impunity, and it still continues, which I'll tell you a little bit about in just a moment. But I'm gonna go chronologically, and then of course I think folks in this room know about the backlash violence that Sikhs, along with other brown people, certainly Muslims and Arabs, encountered after 9/11. And in so many ways, it feels like we're in another post-9/11 moment in the last couple of years, right? Since the attacks on October 7th and the genocide waged by Israel against the people of Gaza since then, it feels like we're in one of these moments again where we're fully in crisis, right? You know, our close family friend, Balbir Singh Sodhi, was the first person murdered in the aftermath of 9/11 in an act of backlash violence. He was a family friend. And, you know, it was a time where we were just hyper-vigilant all the time. I moved to New York shortly after that. I moved to New York in 2003. And I'd say in my first decade or so in New York, right, like 2003 to 2013, I couldn't really go outside without someone calling me Osama or Taliban or telling me to go back to my country. I couldn't ride the subway without being like hyper vigilant and watching my back. That's just how it felt, right? And my turban was pulled off on the subway in 2006 by a group of, they must have been middle school students, to be honest. They were young, and they like pulled it all the way off and like threw it on the floor and ran. And what I can say is, I did not have Chardi Kala during those times. I really didn't. And what happened to me emotionally after that, it was like no different than what happened to me in the 5th grade, right? On an emotional level, I was like, that's who I was in that moment. Like I crumbled. And yeah, and in those times, I really did not have, I was just in this state of hypervigilance, right? And by this time in my life, I had a lot of anger, and I'll talk about that a little bit towards the end in terms of like, yeah, bringing the sage and the warrior together, because at that point I was sort of like warrior mode and not drawing enough upon the sage wisdom that I needed to give myself the skills, to give myself the fortification to be in Chardi Kala. I was in a pretty dark place in those times. Yeah, and then just to like finish this quick timeline is something that I'm not sure if folks know about is that the Indian government has been engaged in a global campaign to go after Sikh leaders. And a Sikh leader in Canada named Hardeep Singh Nijjar was actually assassinated by the Indian government. Was it about a year and a half ago? And there was another foiled attempt to assassinate a Sikh leader in New York within the same year. So in terms of us being the target, it's very, very much present, right? There's this campaign of transnational repression, and in this current regime of Hindu nationalism in India, Sikhs are among its enemies, right? This is a vision of India as a Hindu country. First and foremost, that's built on an anti-Muslim myth, but it also, as you can see, targets our communities as well, and continues this legacy from 1984 that was begun under a different political party, right? That was begun under the Congress Party, which you could think of more as the centrist, kind of like the Democrats here, versus the BJP, who's in power now, which are far rights, and not surprisingly, a whole lot like the MAGA movement. So I think there's a lot of lessons we can learn from the way that Hindu nationalism is operating in India right now, the way authoritarianism is operating in India, where activists are being rounded up on a regular basis, where there's international assassination campaigns of Canadian citizens, of US citizens, right? It's truly unhinged, and now we're like, oh shit, that's happening here too, right? That we have a very similar form of governance here as well. So it's a long history. That's a taste of it. And how does Sikhi ask us to respond to this, right? These decades, these hundreds of years of being targeted, right? Hundreds of years of genocidal campaigns against our people, against so many of our people. How do we respond to it? Well, we respond with Chardi.